September 23, 1944. Netherlands. Farmland 4 kilometers south of Arnhem. 237 British paratroopers lay in ditches and behind hedgerows. They had been in position since 04:15 hours. Dawn had broken 40 minutes earlier. Weapons were loaded, magazines checked, bayonets fixed on some rifles. The men did not speak. They watched a tree line 300 meters to the north. Beyond that tree line, German forces held positions along a road junction. Intelligence estimated company strength, perhaps 120 men. Wehrmacht, not SS. The British had artillery support confirmed. 2 batteries of 25-pounders positioned 6 kilometers southwest. Fire missions planned, coordinates registered, radio contact established. The attack plan was clear. Artillery barrage at 0600 hours. Duration, 8 minutes. Infantry advance immediately following. Objective, seize the road junction, secure the crossroads, establish defensive positions before noon. Standard assault doctrine. The battalion commander had approved the plan at 22:00 hours the previous evening. It was now 05:58, 2 minutes until the barrage. The company commander, a major, crouched in a drainage ditch with his radio operator. He held a field telephone to his ear, the line connected to the artillery battery. He had not yet given the fire command. His hand gripped the receiver. His jaw was set. His eyes moved between his wristwatch and the tree line. The men waited. The artillery waited. The entire attack waited on a single word that had not yet been spoken. The British unit was part of the 1st Airborne Division, remnants of the failed Operation Market Garden. They had been cut off north of the Rhine for 6 days. Supply had been intermittent. Casualties had been severe. The division was withdrawing across the river in stages, but this company had been assigned to hold their current sector for another 12 hours to cover the withdrawal of other units. The German position at the road junction blocked a key route south. British intelligence indicated the Germans were reinforcing this position. If they were allowed to strengthen it further, the withdrawal route would be compromised. The division staff had determined that an immediate assault was necessary. The objective was tactical: eliminate the German blocking force, open the route, enable the continued withdrawal, time-sensitive, militarily justified. The terrain was flat agricultural land. Fields had been harvested. Ground was wet from recent rain. Visibility was good, approximately 1 kilometer in all directions. No fog. Light wind from the west. Temperature around 8 degrees Celsius. Conditions favored the attack. The British had numerical superiority in this sector. They had artillery support. They had prepared positions from which to launch the assault. Everything was ready. The German position was partially concealed by the tree line, but British observation posts had identified machine gun positions, mortar pits, and what appeared to be at least 2 anti-tank guns. Standard defensive setup. The Germans would have clear fields of fire across the open ground. The British would take casualties during the advance. This was expected. The artillery barrage was meant to suppress the defenders and reduce those casualties. Standard combined arms doctrine. The company that would make the assault consisted of 3 platoons, roughly 80 men per platoon when at full strength. Current strength was significantly reduced. Total effective strength, 237. They had fought for 6 consecutive days. Ammunition was adequate but not abundant. Rations were limited. Water was available from local sources but required purification. Medical supplies were low. Morale was functional but not high. The men understood they were fighting to survive and withdraw, not to win a campaign. The major commanding the company had been with the unit since D-Day. He had led multiple assaults during the Normandy campaign. He understood the mechanics of this type of operation. He knew the cost. He knew the necessity. He had briefed his platoon leaders the previous evening. They had synchronized watches. They had reviewed the plan. They had prepared their men. Everyone knew their role. The attack would proceed at 0600 unless orders changed. No orders had changed. The time was approaching. British airborne doctrine emphasized aggressive action and rapid assault. Training at bases in England had drilled these principles repeatedly. Close with the enemy. Overwhelm defensive positions through speed and violence of action. Accept casualties as necessary to achieve objectives. The Arnhem operation had been based on these principles. Despite its failure, the doctrine remained. The Major had executed similar assaults numerous times. The pattern was established. Artillery softens the target, infantry advances under covering fire, assault teams close with grenades and bayonets. Position is secured, consolidation follows. The process was mechanical when properly executed. Success depended on timing, coordination, and momentum. Hesitation was dangerous. Once committed, an assault had to be carried through or withdrawn completely. Half measures invited disaster. The artillery battery commander had confirmed readiness at 05:45. The guns were laid. Ammunition was at the guns. Fire direction had the coordinates. The Major only needed to give the command fire mission followed by the target designation. 8 minutes of high-explosive rounds would impact the tree line and German positions. Then the infantry would move. Standard procedure, practice procedure, expected procedure. The platoon leaders had briefed their sections. First platoon would advance on the left flank. Second platoon would advance center. Third platoon would follow as reserve and would commit where needed. Machine gunners would provide suppressive fire from the British positions until the assault teams were within 100 meters of the objective. Then they would shift fire or cease to avoid hitting friendly forces. Straightforward plan. Clear assignments. Understood by all. The men in the ditches had checked their equipment multiple times. Rifles were clean. Magazines were loaded with 30 rounds each. Grenades were accessible. Morphine syrettes were in breast pockets. Identity discs were around necks. Letters had been written the previous evening. Some had been posted, some had not. The routine of preparation for combat was complete. What remained was the execution. At 05:59, the Major raised the field telephone to his mouth. His lips were close to the receiver. The artillery battery would be listening for his voice. The command was simple. Fire mission. Target reference Charlie 3, commence firing. 7 words, he had said them before. The response would be immediate. The barrage would begin within 30 seconds. The attack would follow. The men were ready, the plan was sound, the necessity was clear. The Major's mouth opened. No words emerged. He closed his mouth. He lowered the telephone slightly. He looked at his watch again. 06:00, the scheduled time. He did not speak. The radio operator looked at the Major. The Major's eyes were on the tree line. His hand held the telephone. His finger was not on the disconnect button. The line remained open. The artillery battery was waiting. The operator did not speak. He waited. Seconds passed. 5, 10, 15. The Major did not give the command. He held the telephone. He watched the tree line. No movement was visible. No sound came from the German positions. The morning was quiet except for distant artillery fire from another sector. Not their sector. Someone else's war, somewhere else. 20 seconds, 25. A platoon leader, a lieutenant, was positioned 10 meters from the Major. He was watching him, waiting for the signal to advance. The signal would come after the artillery. The artillery would come after the Major's command. The command had not come. The lieutenant did not move. He watched. He waited. 30 seconds, 35. The Major lowered the telephone. He looked at the radio operator. He said nothing. He raised the telephone again. His mouth opened. He paused. He lowered it once more. He looked at his watch. 06:00 and 40 seconds. The scheduled time had passed. The artillery had not fired. The attack had not begun. The operator whispered, "Sir." The Major shook his head slightly. A small movement, barely visible. He pressed the disconnect button on the field telephone. The line went dead. He set the telephone down in the mud. He looked at the radio operator and said quietly, "Wait." The operator nodded. He did not ask what they were waiting for. He simply waited. The lieutenant who had been watching the Major realized something had changed. The artillery had not fired. The scheduled time had passed. He could see the major's posture. Something was wrong or different. He remained in position. He did not signal his men. They continued waiting, unaware that the timeline had broken. Minutes accumulated. 0602, 0605, 0607. The men in the ditches began to sense the delay. Some glanced at their watches. Some looked at their section leaders. The section leaders looked toward the lieutenant. The lieutenant looked toward the major. The major was speaking into his radio handset now, low voice. The words were not audible from 10 meters away. The conversation lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Then the major stopped talking. He listened. He nodded. He replaced the handset. The major made a hand signal to the lieutenant, "Come here." The lieutenant moved in a crouch through the drainage ditch. He reached the major's position. The major spoke quietly. The lieutenant listened. His expression did not change. He nodded. He moved back to his position. He signaled his section leaders, "Hold position." The signal was clear. The men understood. They remained in the ditches. 0612, 0615, 0618. The delay was now obvious to everyone. This was not standard procedure. Attacks proceeded on schedule or were postponed with clear communication. Neither had happened. The men were still in assault positions. The artillery was still waiting. The German position was unchanged. But the attack had not begun and no explanation had been provided. Some soldiers began to relax slightly. Muscles that had been tensed for immediate action began to ease. Breathing deepened. Attention remained forward, but the acute readiness began to fade. This was not sustainable. Men could not maintain assault readiness indefinitely. Either the attack would commence or they would need to stand down. The ambiguity was exhausting in its own way. The major was on the radio again. Longer conversation this time. His voice was still too quiet to hear. He was speaking with battalion headquarters. The radio operator could hear both sides of the conversation, but his face showed nothing. He stared forward, professionally neutral. The major spoke. He listened. He spoke again. The conversation ended. He set down the handset. 0623. The sun was higher now. The morning was developing. The day was proceeding. Other operations were occurring in other sectors. This position remained static. The Germans across the tree line had not moved. They presumably had observed British preparations. They would be ready, but they had not initiated action. They waited in their positions as the British waited in theirs. Two forces, prepared for combat, separated by 300 meters of empty field and nothing happening between them. The major's radio conversation with battalion had introduced new information. A reconnaissance patrol from another company had returned at 05:50 hours, 10 minutes before the scheduled attack. They had infiltrated close to the German positions during the night. Their report had just reached battalion headquarters and been relayed to the major. The German force at the road junction was not a standard infantry company. It was a mixed unit, Wehrmacht infantry, yes, but also wounded soldiers from a field hospital that had been overrun 3 days earlier. The patrol had observed medical orderlies moving between positions. They had seen bandaged men at the defensive positions. The patrol estimated that perhaps 40% of the German force consisted of wounded personnel who had been armed and incorporated into the defensive line. Additionally, the patrol reported that German forces in this sector had been in contact with British forward positions during the night through intermediaries, Dutch civilians who lived in the area. The Germans had indicated they were willing to withdraw from the road junction without combat if given until noon to organize their movement. They wanted to evacuate their wounded. They requested no interference during the withdrawal. The message had reached battalion headquarters at 05:47, 13 minutes before the scheduled attack. Battalion command had not ordered the major to cancel the attack. They had presented him with the information and left the decision to his judgment. The tactical situation remained. The road junction needed to be in British hands. The timeline was tight. The Germans' offer could be genuine or could be a delaying tactic to bring up reinforcements. The intelligence could be accurate or could be deception. The major had to decide. The major's assessment was based on several factors: His company was under strength and fatigued. The assault would succeed but would cost casualties, estimated at 15 to 20%. If the German offer was genuine, those casualties could be avoided. The objective could be achieved without combat. The risk was that the Germans would not withdraw and the delayed attack would be costlier. But waiting until noon was 6 hours. If the Germans had not withdrawn by then, the attack could still be executed. The artillery would still be available. The tactical situation would not be significantly worse. The major weighed necessity against cost. The road junction was important but not critical to survival. The withdrawal was proceeding on other routes. This route would ease the withdrawal but was not essential. The tactical value was moderate. The cost in casualties was certain. The possibility of achieving the objective without casualties was uncertain but present. The major decided to wait. He radioed battalion, would hold current positions, would observe German positions, would attack at noon if Germans had not withdrawn as indicated. Battalion acknowledged. The decision was made. At 06:35, the major gave new orders to his platoon leaders. Stand down from assault readiness. Maintain defensive positions. Establish observation posts. Prepare for possible German deception or counterattack. If Germans begin withdrawing, do not interfere. If Germans show no signs of withdrawal by 11:30, prepare to resume assault at noon. The orders were clear. The situation had changed from imminent attack to watchful waiting. The men were informed by their section leaders. The explanations were minimal. Attack postponed, maintain positions, stay alert. The soldiers absorbed this information with little visible reaction. Some felt relief. Some felt frustration at the anticlimax. Most simply accepted it as another change in an operation that had been nothing but changes since it began. They settled into their positions for a longer wait. The tension that had built toward 06:00 dissipated slowly. Equipment was made more comfortable. Weapons were set aside but kept close. Some men ate rations, some smoked. Conversation resumed in whispers. The immediate danger had receded. The possibility of danger remained. The morning continued. At 07:15, movement was observed in the German positions. Small groups of soldiers were visible through binoculars. They were not advancing. They appeared to be organizing. British observation posts reported the activity to the major. He acknowledged and continued watching. The activity continued for approximately 40 minutes. Then it stopped. The German positions became quiet again. At 09:30, the first clear signs of German withdrawal appeared. Vehicles, trucks, and a few ambulances approached the road junction from the north. German soldiers began loading equipment and personnel. The wounded were loaded first. The process was methodical, unhurried. British observers watched through binoculars and reported continuously. The major monitored the reports. He gave no orders to interfere. By 11:00, the German withdrawal was well advanced. Most personnel had departed. A small rear guard remained, perhaps 20 soldiers. They maintained positions while the final vehicles loaded. At 11:20, the rear guard began pulling back. By 11:45, the road junction was empty. German forces had vacated the position entirely. They had withdrawn north toward Arnhem as they had indicated they would. At 11:50, the major ordered a cautious advance. One platoon moved forward to secure the road junction. They encountered no resistance. The position was empty. Defensive works remained but were unoccupied. Equipment too heavy to move had been left behind. The position was secured without a shot being fired. The objective had been achieved. The cost in casualties was 0. The action or non-action at the road junction on September 23, 1944 was recorded in the battalion war diary as Road junction south of Arnhem secured 11:50 hours. Enemy withdrew without engagement. No friendly casualties. The entry was brief. It did not elaborate on the planned assault, the decision to wait, or the negotiations that had preceded the withdrawal. It simply noted the outcome. No commendations were issued for the operation. The major received no recognition for his decision. Avoiding casualties was good, but it was not the sort of action that generated awards. Awards went to those who led assaults, destroyed enemy positions, demonstrated visible courage under fire. The major had done none of those things. He had waited and watched. The result was positive but unremarkable from an administrative perspective. The men who had prepared for the assault and then stood down went on to other actions in the following days and weeks. Some were killed in subsequent fighting, some were wounded, some survived. The September 23 incident became one event among many, notable primarily because it was unusual. They had expected to fight. They had not fought. The memory existed but carried no particular weight. Combat veterans accumulated many such memories. Not all were significant. The German forces who withdrew from the road junction were not tracked in detail by British intelligence. They moved north, presumably rejoined other units, and continued fighting or surrendered in the final collapse of German resistance at Arnhem. Their wounded were presumably evacuated or treated at field hospitals. The outcome of individual soldiers was not documented. The war moved on. The artillery battery that had been prepared to fire never received the fire command. The guns remained silent. The battery commander noted in his log that the fire mission was canceled before execution. No rounds were expended. The battery was reassigned to support other operations later that day. The canceled mission was not investigated or analyzed. It was simply one of many missions that were planned but not executed during fluid combat operations. The decision not to attack existed primarily in the major's memory and in the memories of those few who knew why the attack had been postponed. The reasons were tactical and humanitarian in roughly equal measure. The major had calculated that the objective could be achieved without cost and had chosen that path. The calculation proved correct. But correctness did not generate documentation or recognition. It generated silence in the record. The major survived the Arnhem operation and the subsequent withdrawal across the Rhine. He was evacuated to England with the rest of the division remnants. He remained in the army through the end of the war and served in occupation duties in Germany. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel and retired in 1952. He died in 1978. His obituary mentioned his service at Arnhem, but did not reference any specific actions. The September 23 decision was not among the things he was remembered for publicly. In a private letter written to a fellow officer in 1963, the major mentioned the incident briefly. He wrote, "There was one morning when I should have ordered the guns to fire and did not. The Germans left of their own accord. I have wondered since whether I was right to wait or simply fortunate. The outcome was good. The reasoning remains unclear to me even now." The letter was found among his papers after his death. It was not published or widely circulated. Several of the soldiers who had been in the ditches that morning were interviewed decades later as part of oral history projects. One mentioned the attack that didn't happen and recalled waiting for artillery that never came. He did not know why the attack was canceled. He was simply glad it had been. Another remembered being confused about why they were holding position when the attack time had passed. He assumed there had been communication problems. None of them knew about the German wounded or the negotiated withdrawal. The decision remained opaque to those who had waited in the ditches. The road junction itself was repaired after the war and became part of the regular highway system in the Netherlands. The area around Arnhem was rebuilt. The battlefield remnants were cleared. The site where two forces faced each other on September 23, 1944, shows no trace of that confrontation now. It is farmland and road and ordinary landscape. Nothing marks it as a place where violence was prepared and then withheld. The German soldiers who withdrew that day left no accessible record of their perspective. Wehrmacht archives for the final months of the war are incomplete and fragmentary. If any of them wrote about the withdrawal or the negotiation that preceded it, those accounts have not been found or have not been connected to this specific incident. Their side of the story remains largely unknown. The incident appears in no published histories of Operation Market Garden. It was too small, too localized, and too lacking in dramatic action to warrant inclusion. The operation is remembered for its failures and its costly assaults, not for its quiet avoidances. The attack that everyone prepared for but that never became history remained outside history, a footnote that was never written. September 23, 1944, was one day in a 9-day battle. Thousands of decisions were made by hundreds of officers and soldiers. Most decisions led to action. Some led to inaction. The distinction between wise action and wise inaction is often impossible to establish definitively. Outcomes can be known, counterfactuals cannot. A major in a ditch chose to wait rather than attack. His reasons were tactical and humane. His choice was vindicated by events. The objective was secured. No one died. The war continued elsewhere. The decision existed for those few hours and then dissolved into the larger flow of the war and was absorbed and forgotten. The artillery did not fire. The infantry did not advance. The casualties did not occur. The attack that had been planned, prepared, and scheduled simply did not happen. In its place was a morning of waiting, a withdrawal, and a quiet occupation of empty positions. This outcome satisfied military necessity. It avoided military cost. It left no dramatic narrative. It left only the absence where action should have been. 237 men remained in ditches while a battle they expected did not materialize. They went on to other battles. Some died in those battles. Some survived. The morning of September 23 was one morning among many, distinguished only by what did not occur. The silence of guns that were never fired. The absence of orders that were never given. The gap in history where an attack should have been but was not. The record shows nothing because nothing was there to show. The attack everyone prepared for never became history because it never became anything at all. It simply did not happen. And then the day moved on.